All right, all right. Well, hey, we are continuing our series, Holidays. And anyone feel a little holidayed around this time of year? Like that's a good description of Christmas time for you, between the shopping, between the parties, between just this time, the endless Hallmark movies, right? I mean, it can leave us definitely feeling a little holidayed. And so, really, over the next several weeks, kind of our hope is to kind of get the holy back in the holidays. We shared last week how holidays is really, it's just the culmination of these two root words of holy and days. And so, the next several weeks is how can we get the holy back into the holidays, where it's more, we can slow down from just the blur and the race and sort of the days of so much of the holidays in our lives. And so to kind of do that, I want to kind of kick off tonight. And again, maybe it's because I've been watching way too much of these Christmas Hallmark movies that are kind of on and here's the interesting Christmas Hallmark movies. Like, there's not just one channel now to watch them. There's like three of these things now. So like our DVR is like, it's like literally smoke's coming out of the back of it from all the recording of one new Christmas Hallmark movie after the next. But I think, maybe it was because I've been watching too many of these. But it got me thinking, with the Christmas Story, if I was to do the Christmas Story in a Hallmark movie, like what would it look like? Like what would it sound like if we took the Christmas Story and kind of, put a little bit of a Hallmark twist to it, all right? And, if we did it would, I can tell you that it would have the same 2 or 4 actors and actresses that all Hallmark movies have. Typically, it's like their last stop before their acting career is over. But anyway, another thing. But here it goes. So, once upon a time, Mary and Joseph met at a Bible college with the promise of a ring before spring. If you've ever gone to Bible college, you know that's very true. They were engaged for 2 years as they've saved up enough money, went through premarital counseling, and started volunteering in the student ministry. Finally, the day arrived. They were married in a beautiful ceremony at a Foursquare Church of the Nazareth. And everybody from the genealogy you read about in Matthew 1 was there, including crazy Uncle Zechariah, John the Baptist's dad. They got on the donkey. They rode off into the sunset. There was a sign on the side that said, "Just married." After a couple of years of marital bliss and moving into their first fixer-upper, Mary gets pregnant. She researches on Pinterest the most creative ways that she can tell Joseph that they're going to have a baby boy. And so she lands on between this choice of blue cupcakes and blue balloons. She lands on the cupcakes. And Joseph's surprised. He's excited. He's happy. Eventually time goes on. They go to the hospital. She gets an epidural, and Joseph brings the cigars. They're all excited. They bring Jesus home from the hospital. He was an amazing child, a perfect child. He had a real advantage, that kid, at water polo. Then he grows up and he saves the world. And listen, I share that because, I think if you and we were making up this story, I think that's kind of how we would make it up. I think that's how we would try to make it sound. I think the reality is that, and the reason I share that whole story with you is I think our tendency is if we were the ones, like we had to write the Christmas story, I think a lot of us would clean it up from the reality of the story. Because the reality of the Christmas story is a story that is the farthest thing from a Hallmark movie. The reality of the Christmas story is that's actually incredibly messy. Well, like there's no water polo in this story. There's no blue little baby shoes. There's no celebration. In fact, this was a time really a lot of freaking out going on, especially with Mary. I mean, think about Mary. Mary was a teenage mom. Some scholars say she was probably about 14, 15 years old. And we know that she was freaking out upon the news that she was going to have a baby, and that baby was going to be the Son of God. And of course, the toppers, she was a virgin. So it's impossible, right? And we know she was freaking out because in Luke it actually says, she was confused and disturbed. Again, in other words, freaking out. Like, what in the world is going on here? And then can you imagine Can you imagine the stress? Imagine the tension of how she's going to tell Joseph all this. Imagine how that conversation is going to go down. Like, hey, Joseph, I got some news to tell you. Yeah, you're going to be a dad. Would you imagine how Joseph was probably feeling in that moment? Like, what? Be a dad? What? We've been close. I mean, and so we just see this drama, and we see this messiness, and actually as the story goes on, we see more and more just kind of craziness and messy stuff. I mean, there's a king in Herod that wants to basically kill him, and sets out to murder, all these, little boys, to hopefully protect his kingdom, protect his throne, and so just sort of one messy, crazy, story after the next, and it leads you to ask the question of why all the mess? Why all the mess, and why all the drama? And why things like a virgin birth and stars and angels in this story? It's interesting. I came across an article about a Happy Days episode. Any Happy Days fans? Big show from the 1970s. Yeah, and of course, the cool guy, one of the main characters was the Fonz. And of course, at the end of the 1970s, it started to kind of fade. Like interest started to wane on the Happy Days. It lost its luster. They were starting to run reruns on the Hallmark Channel. Actually, I don't know if that's true, but the interest had definitely dropped off. And so the way for them to get attention and interest back was they came up with this kind of crazy idea that they were going to do an episode with the Fonz on water skis jumping over a real shark. In fact, I think we got a picture, yeah. Anyone actually remember that episode at all? Yeah, you can actually find it on YouTube, and it's not that dramatic, I'm just telling you. So, but the whole goal here was to try to kind of get attention by doing this crazy thing that would somehow spark interest in the show again. And as a result, they kind of came up with a movie term, or in the show business, a term known as jumping the shark. And this term, jumping the shark, that they still use today, it was used to describe, because of this whole scenario, a moment when the writers of a story resort to gimmicks and unbelievable tactics to keep the attention of viewers. It's called jumping the shark. And listen, I share that because I wonder if sometimes when we read the Christmas story, if there's not a few of us that kind of wonder if maybe that's what's going on here. Like when we hear about things like stars, and we see, the wise men and all this drama and all this craziness, is it just a jumping the sharks kind of moment? Are the writers just trying to get our attention, just trying to wake us up, trying to kind of pep up a story that otherwise wouldn't be that exciting? And yet, here's what we got to understand is that I think what we're going to discover tonight is that the reason we see so much drama, the reason we see some of these crazy details in the story is that's not to get our attention as much as to remind us of God's incredible attention to the details of our lives. God's incredible attention to the details of our lives. And listen, here's why this is important, because something you got to understand is that the opposite of fear, so oftentimes we think of the opposite of fear being like courage, or maybe being faith. But the opposite of fear is actually love. It's that, in fact, 1 John puts it this way: perfect love casts out fear. Like when you know that you're really loved, when you know that someone really cares about you, when you know that someone is there for you. I mean, I think about this, like there's never a time where I was thinking of my boy, where he comes down the stairs with cigarette in hand, and it's like, Dad, I'm really stressed out right now. I saw the bills, I got the bills, and the phone bill's pretty high, the electric bill's pretty high, and I'm worried that Paw Patrol is going to get cut off. Yeah, there's never that moment. He doesn't have those stresses, he doesn't have those fears, because he knows that he's got a dad and he's got a mom who loves him so much, who's there for him, who cares for him, who never loses sight of him. See, and this is why this is so important that we get this. Because here's the thing, and we're going to talk about this actually in the next couple of weeks, but I think it's important that we understand is that the way you see Christmas, the way you see the Christmas story, I should say, will influence the way you see God. the way you see the Christmas story will influence the way you see God. In fact, I think for a lot of us, when we think of the Christmas story, again, we kind of think of like that Hallmark picture. We kind of think of like this nativity scene. In fact, I think we got a painting. Yeah. We tend to think of it as this calm and peaceful and this like Norman Rockwell-esque type of painting. It's all as calm, even though, again, with a cow head looking over the baby, I'm not thinking that's going to go real well for the calmness factor in the scene. But listen, how you see the Christmas story, though, it really does, translate and affect how you see God. Because here's the thing, if this is how you envision the Christmas story playing out, like it's always going to be peaceful, and it's always going to be calm, and it's kind of this perfect, Christmas picture perfection out there, the problem happens is that when our Christmas isn't that way, when our Christmas is messy, when our Christmas is confused, when our Christmas has some things that we can't believe are going on or why they're going on, what can make it happen, what can feel like in our lives is that somehow maybe God has forgotten us, that God has lost sight of us. Because if God was there, if God was in the midst of it, then my life would be picture perfect, right? My life would be calm. My life would be restful. My life would always be peaceful. There would be no problems. There would be no issues. Again, how you see Christmas oftentimes will affect how you see God. Just ask Mary and Joseph. Just ask Mary and Joseph. Because, Mary and Joseph, as we're going to see, they were the first ones to hear about the Christmas story before it would ever happen. And here's my thoughts. When they first heard the story is that they would have felt more than a little bit alone. More than a little bit alone in this. In fact, what's interesting, speaking of kind of unique details of the story and how those details can really paint a picture of kind of the real heart of God in the story, is that there's an interesting detail in this, is that when the message of the arrival of this baby, that Mary was going to be born with, baby Jesus, right? How it came to them was it came to them separately. It's interesting that the angel Gabriel, when he's announcing this news that a baby's going to be born, he doesn't sit them both in the room together. Which, again, if I were to write the story, I don't know, I think I would have them both in the room, right? I think I would sit them both down like, hey guys, I think this is big enough news that I really need to make sure you're both on the same page with this, right? Like I'd sit Mary and Joseph down like, hey, just letting you know some big changes are in store for you, right? And I'd probably give them a few parenting tips as well, like this is the Son of God, so, you can't just give him a bath like normal kids. Like there's going to come a time when he wants to, walk on the water and trying to get him under. I would give him advice. I would give him direction. I would invest in both of them together. But that's not how the story plays out. In fact, look at this, Matthew 1:18. It says this, this is how Jesus the Messiah was born. By the way, I like that how it says this is how. It's important that when we're reading the story, it's not just the message of Christmas is found, not just in what happened, but how it happened. The how really matters to this story. And it says his mother Mary was engaged to be married to Joseph, but before the marriage took place, while she was still a virgin, she became pregnant through the power of the Holy Spirit. Joseph, to whom she was engaged, he was a righteous man and did not want to disgrace her publicly, so he decided to break the engagement quietly. Now, again, can you imagine all that's going through Joseph's mind? Again, definitely probably was not Hallmark thoughts. Here's Joseph, and he's got to just feel totally shell-shocked. All the doubts that were probably going through his mind, like, man, I thought we were in love. I thought, I thought we were going to be together forever. And yet here you are, you're telling me that you're pregnant, and we haven't been together? He had been thinking, maybe the bridal shower got out of hand and she fell and hit her head and she just, kind of lost it for a moment. None of this would have made sense to him. Talk about feeling alone. Talk about feeling alone in a situation. And yet, here's the thing. While he questioned her love for him, you got to understand there was no question about his love for her. In fact, we see that in that passage. We see Joseph going out of his way to really protect Mary, because the reality is if the rumor had gotten out that she was bearing a child out of wedlock, it would have been certain death for her. Back in those times, that was a death sentence. And so here's Joseph, trying to do the honorable thing, trying to do the right thing. And so he decides, I'll just bow out. I'll just kind of walk away quietly. I'll not make a scene. And then you can just imagine all the scenarios probably playing out in his mind. If someone asks me what's going on, I'll just say, look, it just didn't work out. And listen, you got to kind of admire a guy like this. You got to admire a guy like this. I mean, again, he's trying to do the right thing. And again, how alone he had to have felt doing the right thing. Because here's the thing, this is a little bit of a side point, but how many know sometimes doing the right thing, you're going to feel alone at times. Especially when it comes to taking a step on a God dream when it comes to your life. There's going to be times when you step out and you're going to feel like you're alone. You're going to feel like you're alone. So often we think of aloneness always in the negative, always as a bad thing. But there's times where when it comes to really living out God's purpose, living out God's dream for our lives, we got to have the courage to be able to walk against and be able to stand alone in spite of the opinions, in spite of the issues, in spite of maybe the statements of others that they might make in our lives, and get beyond just simply living to please others, living beyond making everyone else happy. In fact, I put in my notes this way and this is why I think this is important that we touch on, is that becoming obsessed with what people think about you is the quickest way to forget what God thinks about you. When you get obsessed with what everyone's going to say, what everyone's going to think, what everyone's going to do, if I make this step, if I act on this God dream for my life, listen, it can be the quickest way to forget what God thinks about you, His heart for you, His plan for you, His purpose for you. And of course, the flip side of that is just as true, and I think just as powerful, is that becoming obsessed with what God thinks about you is the quickest way to forget what people think about you. But when you get obsessed with what God thinks about you and His heart for you and His care for you, that's where we find the courage to be able to stand alone when we've got to stand alone for the right thing, to do the right thing, to step into that God dream for our life. And so again, here's Joseph. He's trying to do the right thing, right? And he finds himself feeling totally alone. And I love how God meets him here in this moment. In verse 20, it says, as he considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. Joseph, son of David, the angel said, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child within her was conceived by the Holy Spirit. In other words, listen, you need to know there's nothing unethical. There's nothing shady going on here, nothing immoral. No need to camp out in front of Mary's house at 2 a.m. to see if another donkey's parked out front. I mean, there's nothing. This is legit. It goes on, verse 21 says, and she will have a son, and you are to name him Jesus. And here it is, for he will save his people from their sins. And I love it. It goes on, it says, all this occurred to fulfill the Lord's message through his prophets. Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. God is with us. Man, what a powerful message. It's funny, Christmas for us, I think we can kind of miss the power of this message because Christmas for us comes every 12 months. Honestly, it felt like last Christmas just ended like a month ago, and we're already in another one. But you got to understand, when this message showed up, is that it had been 400 years since the Israelite people had even heard from God. Well, like God just went silent for 400 years. It's known as the intertestamental period between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And they've just been waiting. Talk about feeling alone. Talk about feeling forgotten. And yet here's this news, this message of God showing up on the scene and saying, listen, I haven't forgotten you. I haven't lost sight of you. I'm here. I'm with you. But listen, as powerful as it would have been for the Israelites, I think it would have been just as powerful for Joseph. See, for Joseph, it was even more than just understanding this message that God is with us as a whole, but it was understanding that there was a meaning to our mess. There was a meaning to his mess. Even if that meaning is to be in part in reminding others that they're not alone. Reminding others that they're not alone. In other words, listen, Joseph, I know it's messy, and I know, this is not how you planned it, not how you thought it was going to go. But listen, you got to know that when God is involved, when I'm involved, listen, there's meaning to your mess. That I can redeem whatever the mess, whatever the hurt, whatever the pain, I can use it for a greater purpose, a bigger purpose, a redemptive purpose, to remind people they're not alone. They're not alone. I mean, how encouraging that had to have been for Joseph to be reminded that this mess wasn't all in vain. That God was going to use it to remind people that, listen, hey, you're not alone in your addiction. You're not alone in your failure. You're not alone in your loss. But there's a God who's with you. And not just that, God's people are with you. We're in this together. It's one of the very mission statements of our church is, listen, we want to be a place where everyone's welcome because nobody's perfect. In other words, listen, we're not in this alone. You're not in this alone. Whatever the pain, whatever the hurt, whatever the loss, whatever the struggle you're going through this Christmas, you need to know the message of Christmas